Hi, my name is Clay, and this is the Enneagram Prison Project podcast. In the first season of the podcast, we focused on telling the story of EPP by talking with a few of the people who had major impacts along the way in that first decade of the project. Moving forward, we're going to focus on the now and the future of EPP. In this episode, I speak with 3 EPP Guides about a recent trip back in May to a prison in Southern California where we held a week-long intensive program inside the walls with the folks who live there at the prison. Most people call them inmates, yes, but we don't say that. In fact, if you're in the mood to test drive some new language, we say residents, we say participants, we say students. Thanks for being here, and I hope you enjoy the Enneagram Prison Project podcast. Season 2, Episode 1 starts now.
I'm Halida Hatic. I am a community weaver at EPP, and I am also a guide.
RJD was a fun experience, was for me at least. There are so many adjectives beyond fun that would describe it. And so I'm curious for you, what are some thoughts? What comes in your mind when I talk about the RJD experience? What is it? What was it for you?
The first thing that came to mind was life-changing. Quickly after that, I have been sitting with it for a while now. And what I experienced inside of myself was kind of a quickening of the work, like just this own acceleration inside of me that has happened since our time together with the students at RJD. It really was incredible.
So I think life-changing is a fun place to start with that. We like to start with small stuff. No. So what, and life before RJD and then life now. And for context, we're about a month. Actually, we're I think almost exactly a month away from the last day, or a month and 2 days beyond the end of it. So we're like a month later here. And what is different now than before? What changed?
Yeah, I have it's so funny. I'm using the word I'm going to use to describe it. I want to be in the real. And I felt fully in the experience, I felt the realness of all of it. Being in community with folks in that way, with an open heart, with a lot of presence, holding curiosity inside of myself. And it was an experience. When I say it's sort of life-changing, and the acceleration part of it is sort of took what it is that I have been studying within EPP for the past few years, but the Enneagram in general for, a decade now. And it was the real practical application of all this stuff.
Is this your first time going into prison?
Not my first time going into prison, but my first time guiding in prison.
What's the difference between being a visitor and being a guide, as far as how it feels? Obviously, the technical difference is easy to describe, but how does it feel going in knowing that you're going to sit with a room of residents, as we like to say, or any other word that's better than inmate or offender or any of the other words that are not so friendly? What's different when you're sitting there as a guide?
There was another level of aliveness, and that probably comes straight through my type structure and my essential quality, of desiring to kind of be in that aliveness. And that was present in me from the moment I took my seat. I kept saying to our students, take your seat. And as I was saying that, I was also saying it to myself, that is what I'm talking about. This real kind of, the reciprocity of it was alive. And also the reality of everything we needed was in the room. The real work is about presence. practicing compassion. There's nothing like one's capacity to be with everything and to it's not as if I don't when I say these things, it's as if like I feel like, well, I was saying them before and I didn't believe it, but that's not true. I believed it, but there's like a transformation that was happening inside of me in the same way that it was happening inside of everyone else in that field, in the room that we were occupying together. And it was palpable. Like it was actually palpable. And the work was to just be in that presence, in that aliveness, in that realness of everything that was there, and that it all belonged. It was all a part of the unfolding that we were going through.
You mentioned your type structure, and I intentionally don't start with the intro of, hi, my name is so-and-so, and my type is this, because I feel like it's easier to just jump straight in. And so we can backtrack a little bit, and if you're okay sharing, it's not mandatory, but what is your type structure?
I lead with the type 8.
Yeah. So what I know about type 8, and I can't speak for type 8, but I think, actually, let me rephrase that. Not even what I know, but what I think a stereotype often is, especially going into prison, is that there's this like, I'm not scared. There's no, I'm going in head first. And I think prison brings up things for people that they didn't realize was there. And so I'm curious, like, what did you have any concerns? Not necessarily like safety or physical safety or anything like that, because I think at this point we know that prison, as many people might not believe at first, it's actually super safe. And when we're going in as visitors, we are not only protected by staff, but if, in a classroom of 20 folks who live in the prison, i.e. residents, i.e., inmates for the lay term, if one guy gets out of line, there are 19 other guys willing to help immediately. So there's no real physical concern for me, at least. And I think that's true for most. But beyond that, were there any things coming up with your type, in terms of going in, a new experience, anything around any of that? Does anything come up just in hearing any of that?
I think that the things that came up for me around my type structure were wanting to push back against how because I'm trying to choose my words wisely here. There was the space itself, like, it's not a place that is designed to be conducive for healing.
Yeah.
So the institution, the sheer fact that we, are putting people into places and spaces like a prison with, concrete walls and, when you're inside, a lack of sunlight, all of the things that we know, help people heal. None of them are there. The place itself is not designed to be a place for healing. And so for me, that's the type of reactivity I experienced inside of myself, the wanting to kind of rage against that aspect of it, the like dehumanizing aspect of the institution that is prison. Yeah. Nothing else. They're human beings. They're incredibly beautiful human beings who received us just with a lot of love and openness. That was my experience.
The stereotype, I think, a lot of times is that prison is this scary, violent, place. And it can be, by the way. But I think mostly my experience, both when I was incarcerated and also going back in, my experience is that there are a lot of like routine things that you see, like people are exercising, people are, go to chow, go to, what we call pill call, which is to, just get your medicine or whatever, playing basketball. There's like all these things that are like routine, habitual, mindless, just get me through today. And there's a lot of unspoken sadness. There's a lot of just like, it's concrete and like steel. It's not a super fun place. And so can you sense any of that, or not can you, but do you, when you're in that environment, is that the same for you?
Interesting question. I mean, I think that walking behind the bars, what I feel is the ignoring the pain, like let's just ignore the pain. Not from the individuals, but and not even from, I'm not even talking from like institutional staff necessarily, but just the mindset of how we've even created the spaces where we are going to then, put people, all of it is dehumanizing. And so it's just like why are we not acknowledging, this is the realness of the type, right? Like, why are we not acknowledging what's here, which is what you're illuminating, Clay, which is that there is a lot of pain and a lot of suffering. And that pain and suffering wasn't not present in the classroom. It's not as if it didn't come in, but despite all of it, like there was a willingness, we want our students to opt in, right? Like we want people to choose, to want to be there. And there are lots of different reasons why people choose to take their seat in the classroom. And it kind of doesn't really matter what gets them in, but then they're there and what happens inside of there. And a little bit of it is just the acknowledgement of the pain and suffering and the willingness to be with it with them, which is something that what I suspect has not often been a part of their experience in prison or prior to being incarcerated. So
you mentioned the classroom. It's a nice transition into, I do want to talk about what, and just to paint the picture, the classroom that I was fortunate enough to be there. So I can kind of set the scene a little bit and describe your room was, it was probably, I would say like 10 feet by 15 feet. So it wasn't like a big giant classroom. It was pretty cozy in there. Concrete walls, the tile floors, that, fluorescent lighting, all that good stuff. Not a whole lot of natural sunlight. Matter of fact, I don't think there was a window in there. Where was there? I don't seem to remember there being a window in there either. And if there was, it was the tiny little slit window that you see in prison. So that was like the physical setting. The chairs were at the perimeter of the room. So we do the circle. It's a little oblong circle just because the way the room was. And I want to say 16 or 17 residents there were in class. Am I remembering all that correctly?
You are. It was a 23 capacity room and we had 16 residents. And then you were there, myself, Scott, and somebody from the mental health team. So we were at capacity.
Yeah, literally. And I'm going to talk to Scott tomorrow, and I'm looking forward to seeing some of the things that stand out from him or for him from that week. And you mentioned someone from the mental health team there, and I kind of brain farted there for a minute and forgot that we had a representative in the class with us, and this wasn't someone who just sat in the back of the room and supervised. Like, they were in the circle with us and participated, like during the check-in, answering the questions. I wasn't there when you paneled 5, but he was on the panel, correct?
He was.
What's that like, having involvement from prison staff? As someone who, I have my very strong opinions about people who work in that industry, and without putting my thoughts out there, what were your experiences from just that piece of it?
It was incredible. And I think it really, it introduced a beautiful dynamic into the space. And I think this was the case across all 3 of the cohorts, but the mental health team fully participated. We needed them there because they are the brown card holders. And so it was, a requirement that they be present. And they took their seats too. And like you said, when we say, when you enter EPP's classroom, you are a participant, and that means doing the homework. That means sitting on panel. That means participating in check-in and all of it. And I loved our classroom. All the things that you described, I thought we like won the lottery on the classroom. It was so sweet and intimate, and I get a lot of energy from just kind of that like forced intimacy, I guess you could say.
Yeah. Actually, my favorite part about your room, and also it was a tight like room. It was small, but also there were no obstacles in the middle of the floor. There were no, like, often you'll see tables and chairs bolted down, and they just. So I would agree on on hitting the room lottery.
We also had, I think it's important to say, we had two of our students in our class were a part of the Pooch program. Mm-hmm. So we had two, I think they were two golden retrievers that were with us all week. And that was pretty special.
Yeah, that's a trip, seeing dogs running around inside prison. And it's also a noticeable difference in the behavior of the people who live there when the dogs are around. And I think with the number of, pets that we have who are unwanted and in shelters and all that stuff, God, what a great idea. Whoever thought that would be a good idea to take, pets and put them inside of prisons. That was a good one. I experienced that like the week before that at a different prison too, and it blew my mind. And I'm not even a pet person. I'm allergic to most animals. And so it's not like I'm even that guy who's just like everything with four legs is the greatest thing in the world. Like, that ain't me. And it was still just like, it was really cool.
They were part of the, like, what I can only describe as this like field of receptivity.
Oh, 100%.
For you, I think you were with us. Yeah. And yeah.
Tell that story.
Actually your story, because you really, really called one of our students in when they were processing some grief, and you reflected back that, well, I don't want to speak your words, but you reflected back their light and encouraged them to stay with it. And as you, coached him through it, the one of the pooches went over and sat. Do you remember that? Just like sort of lie down at his feet.
Yeah.
It was so gorgeous.
It was. And the thing, basically what I said to him, I'll paraphrase a little bit, but because I've had this talk with a lot of people on the inside. There's this tendency to just shove down our emotions, and like, I'm not experiencing this while I'm locked up because I'm not in a safe place where I can be emotional, because either people are going to take advantage of me, or like best case scenario, they just sit there and leave me alone, and there's no real interaction. Nobody's coming to put a hand on my back. There's none of that. So it's a safety thing a lot of times. To just shove it down. Like, I'll cry when I'm by myself in my cell later, and I see it a mile away, and I just don't subscribe to this bullshit thinking of, I don't need to cry. I'm tough. And that wasn't really what he was dealing with. It wasn't like a macho thing, but there was head down and like a lot of effort, and to just not letting those emotions be what they are. And basically just calling it out and saying that's bullshit. And I also put it to everyone in the room, and there were the head nods and the vocal yeah and all that stuff, and it was, and that was it for him, and that's a good thing, I think.
And then also just connecting it back to our patterns, and how when we start to be uncomfortable, how our personality steps in. He was really trying to fast forward through the pain and the discomfort, and just inviting him back in to stay present and notice, like notice the habitual pattern of the personality, and just be with that without judgment. And that's what happened again and again and again and again over the course of the week. It was really amazing.
A major part of our week in San Diego was that the turnaround on our bio responses was probably the fastest it's ever been. There were close to 70 students across 3 classes. And I think it was actually in like the high 60s or maybe mid 60s, but there were a lot of people in those 3 classes, and they submitted their bio responses early in the week. And then they not bio responses, they submitted their bios early in the week. And then every one of them got a response. If they turned it in time, every one of them got a response like that week, like while we were still there. And so if you don't mind, can you first, for anybody who don't know, who might not know what the bio process is or what all that, just like a brief description of exactly what that is. And then also, what was that like going through, 10, 15, 20 bios in a matter of a few days or however many it was? I don't know. I just know that every time I looked up, we all shared an Airbnb and we were around each other a lot outside of prison too. And every time I looked up, somebody had a piece of paper that they were holding up, reading and going through bio responses. And so just talk about anything that you want to talk about around that.
It's an important part of what we do on the inside. And so we invite our students, and we were doing an intensive. So I think it's important to mention that. So we were teaching 24 hours, 8 modules over 4 days. And most of us, with the exception of me and Scott, actually had one day, the Thursday, to do all of the bio responses that we were assigned. Scott and I were condensed down into 4 days straight. So we all relied on the community and the guides around the world to support us in that process. But back to, we assign our students, that give them the invitation to tell us their story in third person, from their earliest memory through about 18 years of age. And then we as guides take the time to read every single one of the bios and provide a response, reflecting back again, that there are things that happened to us that never should have happened. And there are things that didn't happen that should have happened. And knowing what we know about the Enneagram, we're really able to be a compassionate witness for our students, and help them be their own compassionate witness too. I think that's an important part of the process, being with our pain and suffering, because that's what we're transforming through presence. That's what we're transforming. So we did that, and it took, like I said, our global community of guides. We have, more than 50 guides now around the globe. And a huge shout out to people like Sue Lambert, who took on a heavy load of bio responses, and others. I know of Sue, and for Scott and I, like I said, we didn't have that Thursday. So we signed the bios on the first day, and we really relied on the community to help us get bio responses back. And every single one of our cohort of 16, I don't know if this is the case over the other 2 cohorts or not, but every single one of our 16 students submitted a bio, which is kind of amazing. I don't think that happens necessarily. We didn't say this, but I was apprenticing. This is my first time guiding in custody. So Scott would be able to tell you a little bit more about how frequently that happens in our other classes.
And that was a pretty incredible team effort to make all that happen, because it was you mentioned Sue, she did a lot of bio responses, and for the listener who might be wondering, well, how did they do that if they weren't there? I'm glad you asked, even though you didn't. But I'm just so we had first of all the staff at RJ Donovan, they took a massive amount of workload and taking all of these handwritten responses from the students and scanning them and then emailing them to literally throughout the world. And so you would have, for example, Sue would get an email, would download the scanned image of a handwritten bio, read through that, and then do a bio response to that. And, of course, type it out, email it back. And then that would be given I'm assuming typing and having that printed out. I don't know if there were handwritten.
Yeah. This is right. You're really like bringing some illumination around like how all of this works. Shout out to Jan Shegda and Jason White, like not only the staff at RJD, but getting them scanned, uploaded to a shared drive. Jason worked all of his magic and got bios assigned to folks that we had already invited to do responses for us, and then had to work with a local printer to get, so we typed up our responses, and then got them to like a local printing store, and Jan picked them up, and we got them all returned before the end of the week. It was a Herculean effort.
It's pretty damn impressive.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to know that like for every one bio to get through and then to come back, like there were like 5 people involved at least in making that happen. Like it was crazy.
So meaningful.
Yeah.
It is so meaningful for the students. So it really does take a village, and thank goodness for our EPP village.
I want to leave you with the last word here, and just it's wide open. There's no question, no prompt, no anything like that. Before that, I'll say thank you. This was kind of like I just messaged you a couple days ago. And it's like, hey, you want to talk about RJD? And you're like, yeah, sure. Figured out a time, and bam, now it's happening. And I appreciate it. It's this was kind of like very quick, and so thanks for giving me some of your time. And I want to know any final thoughts about your experience at RJD, or even anything else that might come up. So I'm going to shut up, and the floor is yours until you're done.
Thanks, Clay. I think I want to finish on appreciation. I know that we just appreciated the EPP community and team that really held us. I felt it when I was there. It went beyond the walls. I could feel our global community and the presence of each and every one of us in that classroom. So that says a lot. I want to appreciate RJD. It was not an easy task for the facility to be able to staff us and receive us and make space for us. Mr. Bossy, who, recorded more than 5 hours worth of video footage from all 3 cohorts and generously gave us the raw footage and is putting together promotional videos for the residents. So when we come back, so much love, so much appreciation for all the ways that we are supported and were supported. And I'm really feeling the partnership that's emerging, particularly in San Diego. Dr. Greenwald for, opening the door initially for us to be able to walk through it. She's been such a champion of EPP in many, many spaces, and certainly in her home there in San Diego. So I'm just feeling a lot of love and appreciation and gratitude to her as well. And I think I have to also conclude, well, you'll get to talk to Scott, but just a bow of gratitude to Scott for his support as, somebody who was a newbie guiding in custody. I really enjoyed the flow of co-guiding with him. It was such a joy. I learned a lot from him. And I felt him holding me and holding us, and it just made it possible for me to really show up beautifully, I think. But my last bow of gratitude and appreciation goes to the ambassadors, to you, Clay, to Alex, to Renee, who was beamed in for one of our panels. I don't know that I know of. We have not entered prison with that many ambassadors, that much support before. And it was extraordinary for me to take a seat with you all was I felt as if I was, not only divinely supported, but that I was the student too. I could feel the work alive inside of me. And I learned so much from you all. So my last word goes, like, just thank you. So much love to you.
Who am I? I think that's still unfolding. My name is Scott Tavenner. I'm a guide for EPP. I get the privilege of guiding people on their journey in and out of confined spaces.
I think a good starting point, without any real specific question, just from your experience, can you just tell me a little bit about what you remember from that week? Anything that stands out? Anything that comes to mind when you hear these three letters RJD?
I think for me, it's an exploration of what's possible, both from the facility and from the residents of the facility, right? I mean, the kindness by the COs, by the administration, and by the residents was just really different than a lot of places that I've had the opportunity to go into. And you could just feel there's a movement happening there, and there's a shift that's happening there. I think I think it might foretell some possibilities in the future. We'll see.
It's funny because anytime the conversation comes up, even just in general chatter with folks who've been there, the staff always gets mentioned. And I've been to a lot of facilities. We've been to a lot of facilities, and that's not always the case. And sometimes it's intentional because sometimes there's not good things to say at all about the people who are staffed at the facility itself. And RJ Donovan is just different, or as some people might say, just built different. And it feels like they're. I'm just actually going to correct myself. It's not a feeling. It's actually, for me, it's reality that they are a part of the team, and they were in our classes, and not just in a. Talked with Halida yesterday about this. They weren't just there just as a way to supervise or maintain security or any of that stuff. They were in the circle with us and on panels and answering questions and doing the check-in. Have you seen that kind of involvement from any staff at any other place that you've been to?
No, not officially. I mean, it's not sanctioned in a lot of places, right? So just yesterday I was in jail, and we were in a large room in a pod with 60 men, 20 in class. And we were doing a class, and this one CO kept walking in, and he was patrolling. He was, looking, but it was amazing how slow he would walk in the areas where he had a lot of visibility to the classroom space, right? And he was clearly like listening in and clearly intrigued. And this person has made a shift towards us, even he's made, as we walk in now versus, a couple months ago, there's just an openness to what's happening in the room. And I think what's happening might be, I'm beginning to see how this is making my life a little bit easier too. And I'm getting curious, right? So the curiosity, but it's almost as if I'm wearing this uniform and I'm not allowed to be curious. I'm not allowed to be part of it. And so there's this kind of this barrier that people try to make permeable, but it's almost as if the rules, regulations, institutions don't allow it. Where RJD, I think, is really playing with that, how permeable that barrier between staff and residents are, even by using the name residents instead of inmates, for example.
Yeah, and I was actually about to ask you about that, because that's something that's new to me. Even like in when I was locked up, and even in the years after, to me, I never thought twice about using the word inmate to describe someone who's incarcerated, because for me, it's just an accurate term, and I never thought twice about it, which is the thing that is worth pointing out. Is it was nothing that I ever questioned. Like, why do we say this? It's just like that's what they're called. And in Texas, we say offender. We don't even say inmate. It's just, your ID has in giant red letters, offender written across the front of it. And when they speak to you, they speak to you as offender, and that is just normal. And so to me, inmate is even softer than what I was used to here. And Dr. Greenwald was actually the first person I heard use that terminology of calling someone a resident. And I actually thought it was a joke at first. I thought, well, it's, because I make the joke of gated community all the time. So resident, right, is like part of that. And the more I was around that that type of thinking, the more I realized, no, this is actually just the way it is. It's not a play on words. It's just a shift in language that is relevant. And is RJ Donovan, is that where you first experienced that? I can assume one way or the other, but that going from inmate to saying resident.
Yeah, that's the first I've experienced it. I think the closest before that was Jean-Philippe used detainees. I think they call it in Belgium, they call them detainees, which I think is one step closer, but residents is the furthest I've seen. And I think that I might take a little bit of, when you say it's just a word, I think words have the power to framing, right? And we know neurologically we use words to give us context. And I think that when we choose a word like residence versus, offender, inmate, detainee, we're choosing to move closer to humanity. And I think that's what we were feeling, at least where we were. Now, we didn't get to see all of RJD. We didn't get to see, and so could there be different feelings, different places? Possible. But for what we experienced, and we got to experience, 2 different yards, and it was pretty similar in both yards. So I have to say that.
I agree, by the way, the words absolutely matter. And it feels different to say resident than it does inmate. And that, to me, indicates that's all legit. And also, just a small aside, some of the folks there, the staff there at RJD, they also say patient. And when talking about residents, which I think is cool. So the class, it was a week long. It was several hours per day, and your class was actually 1 day shorter, so you crammed more into a smaller amount of time. Can you talk a little bit about what the week was like in terms of curriculum? What happened in class? What did you expect going? Any of that stuff as far as the class time itself that week.
I think what was noteworthy to me is we had 16 people in our class. All but 2 were essentially on long-term stays. Over half the class was life without parole. The other group had terms of 800 years, which is essentially life. And no one had been in prison for less than 14 years. And I say that because despite having, all of those things stacked against you, the hope and curiosity and ability to do self-reflection was remarkable. And some of it was, hey, I'm trying to get myself off. I'm trying to earn enough place to get myself off and actually get a date. And I get that. But there were several people who had really come to the realization that this is my life and I need to make the most of it. And I put myself in their position and I wonder, could I do that? Could I actually have hope and a life that is a resident of a state penitentiary in California? I don't think I could. And I just found that remarkable and inspiring for me to explore what parts of myself I take for granted. And
by the way, just when you say get a date, to the casual listener, you're talking about parole and the ultimate hope of getting out, which, it's wild. I actually didn't know that at the time, that the smallest amount of time was 14 years as far as how long everybody had been gone there. I knew that there was some long timers in there, and I didn't know I didn't know that. Wow. So that's a wow. I had the pleasure of spending the first day of the week in class with you, and it was pretty cool. And there's one story. It's, I hate to say favorite. It's probably my favorite story of the week, though. And I'll let you tell it if you like, about one of the people in the class who, in the beginning of the week, he and I'll bleep out his last name, but we can say his first name. It's part of the check-in. He said, my name is, I am this type. I'm above or below the line. And part of his check-in, he said, that's my last name, and does this ring a bell?
It does.
As we giggle, because of course it's a pretty big bell. He said, part of what I want to do here, because, early in the week we're stating our intentions. I don't remember the exact check-in question, but the idea is to state your intentions. What are you here for? Why are you here? And part of his check-in was, I want to be Jamal. I want to find Jamal again. and there was some phrasing that I don't remember verbatim, but the idea was I go by my last name. This is how it hit me, at least. And you could share how it hit you. I go by this thing that was created by a system, but I just want to be Jamal again. And I just want to, and I don't know, I thought it was such a beautiful way of A, articulating that, and B, identifying the purpose of what he was there for. And I think, talking about words matter, names matter too. Like, I'm not a big fan of nicknames and people using street names and stuff like that. And I don't like being called Mr. Toomey, and my birth name is Clayton. Nobody calls me that. I'm Clay. And it's not a matter of shame or anything or any of that stuff. It's just, this is how you tell me that you know me, is you call me Clay first. And that's how I took what he was saying with this check-in and what happened as the week went on with him.
Yeah. So we first had everyone write their names, first name on a name placard that they put in front of themselves. And everyone in the class wrote their first name except for one. And as we went in, checked in, this individual checked in with their last name. I'm like, okay. And he said, I've lost myself so long ago. I would really like to find Jamal again. And it was almost as if he had taken on the persona by only using his last name. And I think it was even before prison. And so we let him have his placard and his name card with his last name on it. And it was the last day. And I walked over and I gave him a pen and a new placard. And I said, are you ready yet? And he said, yes, I am. And he took the new one out and he wrote Jamal on it. And as he put the placard on the ground, he looked back up and the whole room was silent. And he had this beaming smile. And he said something to the effect of, it's been a long time since I felt like myself.
When I saw him, I was only in your class the first day. And when I saw him at the end of the week, I don't know that I realized that it was quite that, I guess, addressed in the class itself. And I didn't know that about the class falling silent. I saw him at graduation and I just, handshake, fist bump, that, just a very casual, like, hey. And I just said, Jamal, right? And he's just smiling ear to ear. He's like, yeah, man. Yeah. And that was, it's not an insignificant thing, man. Like so like I said, that's my favorite. It's my favorite memory from the week. And it's hard. How do you navigate those kinds of situations where, like, when somebody says something like that early in a week, like, where, what the potential is, where you'd like to see it go, but how do you allow something like that, for lack of a better words, or just like without being too pushy? Because a very easy thing to do in that moment would have just been like, well, give me your thing here, write Jamal, and almost like just shrug it off, like, well, what the hell? Who cares? Just change your name. And honestly, that's my go-to reaction, like, because it's almost like, well, if you want to be called Jamal, be called Jamal. But that's the wrong play right there. That's not the way. That's not the smooth. That's not the right reaction, I think. And so I screw things like that up a lot. And I'm actually curious how do you know how to handle those situations so well? And how do you go about the doing part of that being, it seems like it's easy for you. Like that there was no forcing from either you or Halida in that moment to just do it. It was very like, okay, thanks,
I actually don't know how it's done. Often question whether I actually do it right anyway. But that's my own internal inner critic stuff. I've done this long enough to realize that the power of our teaching, the gold is in the moment. And it's not trying to turn it into something else. And so no matter what is said, no matter what happens, that is the gold from which we get to weave our tapestry. And learning to accept that and not just go on to the next teaching or not go to the thing or not to force it. But okay, this is your journey and you might make it this week or you might not. And if you make it, I'm going to be so excited for you. And if you don't, I'm also going to be excited for you because you took a step down that path and you know where you want to go, but it's not my job to take you there. It's my job to stand next to you. And I think you said this the best. I will take the next step with you. I'll be there next to you. And when you feel like you're stumbling, you can lean on me. But my job isn't to take the step for you or to take you there. It's to help guide you in the process of you discovering that. And that can happen in 4 days. Sometimes it's going to take 4 years.
Yeah. So, yeah. Thank you. Appreciate that. There's a couple of things that I don't want to go without asking about. One of them is the bio, the process, the process of those in class, writing a bio and then turning it in. Then, as a guide, you read, you give a response, and typically that whole process, it takes a while. Like it's not Amazon next day delivery kind of thing. But this week, the week that we're talking about at RJ Donovan, it was pretty quick turnaround for the bios, and we all stayed at an Airbnb together. So I saw like all the other guides, going through the bios all week, and I know that there was a process. I talked with Halida about the staff scanning and sending bios to guides around the world, literally, and it was a lot different that week than it typically is. And so what, how'd that feel?
Well, first of all, it's too easy to overstate the contributions of the people in the room and understate the contributions of the community that literally help us write 60 something bios and effectively 48 hours. Right. And so bio responses. And I think that the focus on us isn't necessarily complete either, because we also ask students who literally were introduced to this concept of the Enneagram, got a brief overview, 6 hours, and said, okay, start writing your bio. Tell us all about your childhood experiences, right? From the time you first remember till the time you're 18, 20 years old, right? And, oh, by the way, you have 1 day to turn it back in so we can turn around and stuff like that. So it wasn't just us. Like the amount of perseverance of sitting in a class for 6 or 8 hours, then spending all night processing and writing a bio to be able to turn it in the next day is also remarkable. And we had 100% of our students did that assignment. And many of our students said to us, this is the first time I've ever told anyone about some of these things in my life. Mm. And so I think what's remarkable, while it was a challenge to absorb some of these life stories, to respond, and then to have to do it again in a short time frame, put a demand on the guide's ability to be present with the pain and their own stories. I think it's even more remarkable to really explore ourselves in some ways for the first time and share that with another, especially in that shorter period of time, that short of duration. I think was the more remarkable part of it for me.
Yeah. Thank you for pointing that out, because it is easy to gloss over that and to skip that part of it and throw all the praises to the people who read it and wrote it back. And I've read some of those bios and they're rough, and there's a lot of sharing on the part of the person who's writing it. And there's a lot of pain in there. It's just a lot of pain. So thanks for describing that part of it, because I think that's literally where it begins. Because without them writing it, none of it happens.
I think it starts with the other homework too, right? Yeah. It's bio plus 5 other homeworks. And I think that learning to write about ourselves is one thing. I think what's even harder is learning to be seen. Yeah. Because, I've had this conversation with lots of incarcerated and lots of the ambassadors that, and I think anyone can relate to those moments in our lives when we're actually seen for who we are rare.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes this is the first time for many of our students, this is the first time in their entire life that anyone's actually taken the time to see them. Not their crime, not their tattoos, not their affiliations, not the pain, the misery, but actually what's underneath all of that. And that's scary. At least it is for me.
Yeah, I agree. It is. I mean, that was my childhood. Everything I was known for was all that I did, and very, very little of who I was. And you live a life like that long enough, you don't really, at some point, have a good understanding of who you are in the first place, and it all becomes about your actions. And so, yeah. I want to honor our time. We have a few minutes left, and are there anything we didn't touch on, or anything from that week, or any thoughts you want to share?
There was we had 2 bunkies in our classroom, and one was an ex-skinhead, and the other one was born and raised in Compton, California. And our society and our world is in a place where conversations about race and class and privilege are prevalent. And it was prevalent in that classroom too. And more than once, the pressure of talking about ourselves became too great. So we wanted to go talk about a social issue instead. And these 2 roommates, bunkies, they were having these conversations themselves, even before our class. What I watched happen is, as their understanding of themselves grew, their ability to relate and understand the other also grew, to the point where it was post-graduation, and I got to see both individuals after we graduation, this day after we graduated, a day early. So that was next day, I was in RJD, and walking through the yard, and I ran into one of the individuals who was sitting there with his dog and had this relaxed glow about him that I had never seen before. And then I walked into the building and I ran into his roommate, who ran up to me and gave me this huge hug, and which is not allowed. And it was right in front of the CEOs and everybody standing there. I'm like, well, here we are. And he's like, yeah, he goes, this is so awesome. My 82-year-old mom wants to take the course online with you guys. And I think that when we talk about the power of healing, when we talk about the power of community, I think these words understate what can happen. Because when we can have 2 people from completely different experiences, completely different indoctrinations, who can learn to live together and then accept and appreciate the other, then we can get to true understanding, and we can actually maybe finally put some of these artificial labels, constraints that we put on ourselves behind us and put it on the shelf as a piece of history instead of a piece of our reality. And if that's not worth waking up and doing the work for every day, I don't know what is.
I'm so glad I'm recording. That is so, I get to listen to that as many times as I want. That's good shit, as we say. Thank you, Scott. I appreciate you, man. Thank you.
I appreciate you.
I'm Jan Shegda. I'm a guide with EPP and was part of the intensive at Donovan Prison outside of San Diego. It was my second time there. I had been there as an apprentice guide in 2019. It was an amazing week. We had 3 different groups, 3 different classes, 3 guides, 3 new apprenticing guides, plus 3 ambassadors. And it was just incredible.
Thinking about the week at RJ Donovan, like what are some just first thoughts that pop up for you?
Yeah, the first thing I was thinking about, there's this one participant who has really been sticking with me. A lot of them do, of course, but this particular guy was probably the most resistant we had at the beginning. One of the questions we often use to check in during our in custody programming is, what are you addicted to and how does it serve you? And his response was something like, I'm addicted to lots of things and I'm still high from last night, or something similar to that. Kind of a more resistant response, like not really wanting to go deeper. And watching his change throughout the class, to me, was one of the most impactful things. And I don't know if it would have been noticed by everyone, because he essentially just became less resistant and less defensive.
Yeah.
But we have homework in those classes as well. So he was turning in these different assignments, and it was amazing to watch the transformation from none of this can help me and none of it matters to these glimmers of hope coming in for him, and feeling more open-hearted and like he's not defined by his past, which was pretty horrific things he did very, very young, and was working off several life sentences.
Mm-hmm.
So he really sticks with me as an example of maybe someone that would never make it onto a podcast, let's say, or a billboard or anywhere else to tell his story, and also didn't really like speaking in class or anything, but in these assignments, he talked about how meaningful the experience was and life-changing, and that's what it's all about.
Yeah. So as a guide, when you're in that situation, and I will admit that I struggle with this, with my reactions and or reactivity in those moments, and when I feel a pushback from someone or anything that isn't like willing to go with, I suppose, I get I'm activated, I guess we could say. So, as a guide, and this is a class, by the way, we're there for 6 hours a day for like 4 or 5 days that week. So this wasn't just like a 1 hour, like see you in a few months kind of thing. This is someone that you're going to see throughout the week. And so as a guide, how do you, I know outwardly how the response looks a lot of times because I see that, but inward, or internally, how does that feel as a guide? How do you know how to navigate that situation? I mean, what is it that you're doing in that moment so that it doesn't turn into a dumpster fire, which is what I feel like I would make it turn into,
Yeah, well, it definitely was a trigger for me in the moment. Like, oh no, what do I do? What do I say to this person? And to be honest, I don't remember exactly how I responded. It was probably something like, okay, received, or, and let's move on, or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was literally one of our first times asking for some participation from folks, I didn't want to push him too hard. But I definitely stewed on it later. I think that was our last class of the day. So we went home and kind of decompressed afterwards. And then we were going back the day after. And I definitely thought about him and some different strategies. So like, what happens if he's that resistant tomorrow? Do I push a little further? How do we get him engaged? Is he someone we need to remove from the class? Is he going to affect the container? So I created some different options in my mind and talked with my partner in crime, who was going to be co-guiding with me the next day. And luckily, he moved from actively resistant to just more inwardly pondering by the next day. He wasn't disruptive anymore.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
We're not on video, so you can't see me smiling ear to ear as you use the phrase partner in crime, because I think it's funny in this context, with what we do. And it's a common phrase that, you hear just in general, but also in EPP. So I always get a kick out of that when I hear that. So thanks for the Thanks for the free smile today. So
I didn't even think about that, but yeah, it's like it's kind of not culturally sensitive whatsoever. Wow.
I'm all for it. I support it, and maybe the next person won't, but it makes me giggle. Like I just think because it's we soften so many things that are very severe, and then sometimes things that are very nice and sweet. We like to spice it up a little bit with phrases like partner in crime. So I don't know. I think it's from my point of view, it gives me a big smile. So I appreciate it.
It's ironic for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And so this, I think I know, and we can leave the names out and keep it vague and all that good stuff. But I actually think I heard about, because I was in your class later in the week, second or third day, perhaps. And I remember coming into your class and knowing, not necessarily knowing the situation, but knowing that this was, that there was a potential for some, for some friction, I guess. And then what I experienced was that it was a very mild, not like eagerly sharing and just all of a sudden head of the class kind of thing, but it was very mild in terms of what I expected. And is this the guy who had like a couple thousand years on his prison sentence or something wild like that?
Yep.
Yeah. So I know exactly who you're talking about. And it was nice to see that my expectations weren't met at all. It was very tame. And there was some of the typical pushbacks or lack of desire to participate, like not picking a type, things like that. And those are the things that I actually get triggered by. And I admire how that is handled and how that is allowed in the class by guides such as yourself, because I don't know that I would let somebody, and let is not the right word, obviously, but I would struggle to go a whole week and or even a few days without somebody picking their type. So when somebody says to you, I'm type 10, or I'm not a type, or I'm all the types, what?
Yeah, it's not my favorite thing either, I'll tell you. And I think what I've learned over time and just from talking with other guides, it really triggers my social instinct. And I believe that's top for you too, isn't it, Clay? So it's like that, we're all here together. Can't you get with the program? Can't you, be with us about what we're here to do? And so I can get real hot about that. Yeah. Until I remember that what we're here to do is allow people to find their voice, find their own, these are my words, find their own path to healing, understand the ways that they've held themselves back. And everybody has a different pace in doing that, in a different way that shows up. And so if it's not actively dangerous to everyone else in the class, then it's in our values to allow that and support it and celebrate it even. So I'm aware that I can have a very quick trigger about anything that feels like it's not going along with the group or impacting the container. But really, that doing things your own way, there's no harm in that. It's not impacting the safety of anybody else.
Yeah. And that's good for folks like me to remember too, when I want to just tell someone to cut the shit, because it's what I want to say, and it's not necessary. It's just not. And no matter how much I want to tell someone to just like, come on, man, or someone who I think it was in your class also, part of their check-in was, I'm above the line as always, and they put that as always, I'm above the line, and it was, and we actually, I don't know if I told you about this, but we talked about it towards the end of the week. I went and this was a very friendly type 3, very just one of those kind of people. He's just likable, always smiling ear to ear, and he's, from my experience, it's fun to be around. But that when he checked in, that as always, it just kind of irked me a little bit, because I think that there's something behind that. So I actually went to him and I said, "Hey man, I'm gonna challenge you next time you check in. Don't say the as always, and just replace it with currently, and just test drive that. Just see how it feels. And if you don't like it, then don't do it again. But just try that on for size." And the next time he checked in, it was, I'm currently, I'm just above the line, and it was, for me, it was like this. Of course, nobody else knew that we had that conversation, but those little moments like that are so cool to me, because it's like, hey, like this brick wall that he's been walking around holding in front of himself to protect him is like he was given permission to like maybe just stand to the side for a moment. So that, from your class, that was one of my favorite moments. Something as small as somebody just replacing as always with currently. And I mean, I'm sure there's tons of other positive memories from that week with you in class. Are there any others that come up that are worth sharing?
Yeah, I love that story, Clade, because even though it sounds small, it's a really big deal. That's dropping the personality, right? For a moment, like, actually, let's do the exercise, which is, am I open, curious, and available? Let me check in and see if that's true for me and report back on that. Instead of creating a catchphrase, instead of creating, an ego self around, part of our check-in. So it is a really big deal. And what's coming to mind, it wasn't from this year's class at RJD. It was actually back when I had my first class there for my apprenticeship. I think this was 2018, maybe 2019. And we had a student in class. And this actually happens pretty frequently. I would say one or two folks in any class I guide, including some of our public-facing programs, have concerns around the above the line, below the line concept, which for those of you, it might be new to you. It's just when we check in for the day for class, you report, like, you locate yourself. Am I open, curious, here, available, above the line? Or am I below the line? Am I distracted? Am I lost in some kind of emotion and not able to focus? Those kinds of things. And this particular student, he was a type 5. And he said, I just think that this is a dualistic way to look at the world. I'm not with it, and had a lot of actual, like, theoretical, he wanted to get real poetic about it.
Yeah.
And so it was triggering for sure. I was guiding with Dana and Susan at the time. And what we decided to do is just say, okay, we don't have to use that language. Can you tell us whether you're open and available? And so we went through the motions of doing this. It was another intensive. So it was 5 days in a row. And every day when he would check in, he would say, I am interested to see what will happen today. He always changed up the language to something, but it certainly wasn't above the line or below the line. And of course, the whole room was like, this guy. But then the final class, when we were doing the check-in, he said his name, his type, and he said, I'm above the line. And the whole room just like burst into applause because everyone was like so like annoyed as shit at this guy. And but that was a really beautiful moment because, again, it's like dropping your story of like, I'm wiser than this system, or it's too simple for me, or whatever it was that was going on for him. And from the outside, it could be hard to see like, why is that such a big deal? But it really says a lot.
I love the response from the class in that story because it really shows, with their applause, with their support. I think something that maybe when I talk about, going back inside a prison and doing classes like this, I think I leave out a lot of times how supportive of an environment it is because of the participants, because of the residents, the people who live there, who are incarcerated. It's not, if you have a room of 20 people, it's very rarely 20 individuals who you are there to do one-on-one with. It's a class, it's a group. And there is, I don't know what word I would use. I don't know if it's camaraderie or if it's support or if it's whatever, but very often there is that element that I think folks on the outside who've never been inside, it's not one of those things that just goes without saying. Like, it's worth talking about that there is a bit of a supportive environment there within that class, and it's a massive part of what makes this doable. I think, at least that was my experience as an inmate, being in class. It's nice to know that at some point, and it's not immediate, it's not day one most of the time, but at some point I know that I can let the guard down a little bit and be real and not be judged for it. And I have the support of the guy sitting next to me.
Absolutely. And the words that are coming up for me about it are, it's even more than support. It's almost like loyalty or a code. It's really strong.
Yeah.
And of course, as guides, it's part of our job to make that possible, set the stage for that. But only the students can create that and reinforce it. And it only takes one or two people to really chip away at that container, just like we were talking about, from the example from the beginning.
Yeah.
But it's absolutely created and maintained by the students. It reminds me of this most recent time, a month ago or so, another Type 5, really beautiful experience where this was our final class. It was actually after graduation when we were back in our cohort. Were you there with us, Clay, for that portion? I'm trying to remember.
I think I was at all the graduations, but I was also in and out. There was a lot of movement those last couple of days, the last day in particular. So it's possible, but I don't know actually is the answer.
Okay. Well, at any rate, there was a really tender moment where we had a Type 5 in the class who kind of broke down, got really teary, and one of those cries where your body starts to betray you a little bit, you start sniffling and it was amazing how everyone else in the room held that space, allowed it. No one was cracking a joke, and we had a lot of jokesters in our class, as often happens. Nobody was trying to make it okay or redirect or anything. They just allowed him to have the time and say what he needed to say, which was especially beautiful because this was a person who didn't speak up in class a lot. And when he had, up until then, it was pretty, straightforward, logical. Don't use 50 words when 5 will do.
Yeah.
And so to see him really having a moment and everyone there to support him is another takeaway I have from the class. It was just really powerful.
And it's something that you don't expect in a place where people have been gone and have not had freedom for decades. You see the movies that we see, and by the way, some of that stuff, the movies get it right sometimes, but there's also a lot of humanity in there. And what I've experienced is when you just when you allow the humanity to exist, it'll show up. Like it's very, very rare that you have to force that onto someone. If you create the safety for them to be that, then that's who shows up. That's who you get, which I think is nice. It's neat.
It's amazing. It's so human. It's inspiring. And it's unlike, for me anyway, having facilitated the Enneagram in a lot of different spaces, it's unlike any other space I've worked in. People inside are so hungry for places to be real, to let their guard down in a way that feels authentic and safe. And they're wanting to do the work. And it's not like people on the outside don't want that, but they're can be more defended, and they have other support systems or ways where they don't need to go there, or at least in their minds they don't. So I am every time I guide really overwhelmed and taught actually by those who are inside and their willingness to be vulnerable, authentic, and do the work.
It's so good. I know that you have a lot of experience in non-prison environments, and I wish I could ask you a million questions about the difference between a corporate environment versus a prison, but for the sake of time, we'll save that for another day if you don't mind, because I really do want to know what those differences are. And for a moment, I kind of want to just take a step outside of RJ Donovan and go to that house on, I can't believe I forgot the name of the street. Was it Reed? I think somewhere. Yeah, Reed. The Airbnb that there, it felt like, what were there? 6 or 7 of us there? There was a lot of people there. Guides. It was Halida, Scott, who I spoke with earlier this week, Ariane, and you, Alex, and myself, I think. I don't know if I forgot anybody, but
yeah, you got it.
What was it like? I tend to be fairly isolated. I don't mind living with other people, but I like my space, so to speak. What was it like for you sharing a house with that many people? that you were around all day and then again all evening for that week?
I loved it, and it was a lot. Probably a similar response you've heard from everybody. For me, there's a difference of what I want to be able to do and what I then realize my body allows me to do and my workload allow me to do. And those things are not often aligned. And that definitely came up for me the week of RJD. Yeah. But one thing I remember, Clay, actually, that I really appreciated, one thing that I remember that was kind of a challenge was actually just the volume at times. Like I can get overstimulated by just a lot happening or loud talkers or whatever. And I won't name names or anything, but so a great thing about Clay is there might be 6 of us or 8 or 10 of us at a table all talking about something. And Clay will just leave the table, go sit over on the couch, like 5 feet away, and somehow feel totally still connected to what's going on. And I just kept thinking, I'm like, Clay, that is genius. Why have I not done this in like every situation I can possibly do it? So, but there were definitely times where I either went and worked on a puzzle in another room or went to my room and just decompressed for a bit. But I felt like I maybe didn't engage with others and I wasn't as proactive as I would have wanted to be with a different, I guess, energetic reality, but I loved it. I would do it all the time.
Yeah, same here. And I'll tell you a silly story or a little fun fact about me. The reason that I do that, it's completely intentional, by the way. And it's very rarely is it just a random, well, fuck this, I'm out of here. It's so when I was in prison, we, one of the programs that I was in, we did a weekend event around formal dining etiquette. And they brought in, we did like the whole Toastmasters thing and we did like public speaking, there was like a bunch of different things around this event. And part of it was the formal dining etiquette and all the things that you do and don't do. And so in that, I learned that at a table that there should only be, and I'm not even supporting whether or not this is true. This just is what I was told. And so I've run with it.
I can't wait to hear it.
When I am at a table, if there are 6 or fewer people, then there should only be one conversation. And then beyond that, it should be one conversation per 6 in multiples of 6. So if there are 6 people, one conversation. If there are 7, then you could have 2 all the way up to 12. And then if there are 13, then you could have 3 all the way up to 18. So you get the idea. And so for me, there were 6 or if we had visitors at the Airbnb, there were more than 6, but 6 or 7 people is usually, we'd be hanging out or at a table or doing whatever. And if multiple conversations spun off that broke that quote unquote rule that I learned, it's so much, it's not even like I can't handle it or can't process the amount of conversation. It's just, I'm so overwhelmed by this silly rule that I learned, quote unquote rule, that it's all I can think about. And it's a struggle for me to like, which conversation do I get in? And so in an effort to solve that problem, if there's 6 people at a table and there's 3 conversations, I just leave because mathematically somebody's going to be talking to themselves and the 3 conversations will turn into 2 conversations, which is much more tolerable. And if I'm sitting on the couch 10 feet away, I'm still there. I can still hear and I can still throw in little one-liner jokes here and there and still be social. And I do want to be there. I love being in a group like that. I don't want to leave, but that's my attempt at solving that problem. Is just, I can't be actively in a conversation if I'm not at the table, but I can passively, exist over on the couch. So anyways.
That is even more well thought out than I expected. And I don't know why I'm surprised, Clay. That's amazing.
It is. Yeah. And one day I'll get to the point to where I'll have a better solution, but for the time being, that works. And you know what? That class that I'm talking about was over 12 years ago. So maybe that habit is going to be around for a while. And it's never like, I don't throw any jabs like, fuck this. Y'all are talking too much. Blah, 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 blah. None of that stuff. It's just kind of like stand up and moonwalk. And Alex does it even better than that. He just disappears and nobody knows when he left or how he left or where he went. You just look up and you realize, oh, Alex is like Houdini. He just disappeared.
Yeah, he's just gone poof.
Yeah.
So the one thing that I definitely want to ask about is the bio response process. And this is something that I covered with both Halida and Scott. And I want to ask you what that was like from your perspective. And we've talked a lot about the logistics of it. And what we haven't said is a large part of why that was even possible was that you were coordinating this week. Like the week that we're talking about went down because you did what you do. And yes, there was a lot of support from the staff. There was a lot of this, there was a lot of that, but it all, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think I am. It's this all centered around you being able to identify the hows and the who's and all that stuff. So if you don't mind, just chat a little bit about that process, to where we could see 60 some odd bios and have them responded to in a matter of days.
Yeah. Well, the first thing I was going to say is name all the different support areas, but you beat me to that. So I guess I have to come up with a different tactic here, Clay. I guess I would say I would attribute any success maybe that I've ever had with these kinds of projects to a never say die attitude. And we will just do what we need to do until it is done. And if it takes us all night, it will be done and it'll be fine and everyone will help. And what I love about EPP is EPP often starts with, what's the right thing to do? Okay, well, whatever the right thing to do is, and that's what we're going to do. And what's the right thing if we're asking 60 or 80 students to turn in a biography? Well, the right thing to do is to get them a response at their graduation. So that's what's going to happen. So once you're committed to that, it's easy in a way because you don't have to, there's no negotiation on that point. So then you just work backwards and say, okay, how many dozens of bio responses do we need to ask Sue Lampert to do? And, which I'm sure has already been covered, but
yeah. We can say it again, though. She did quite a few. She had a lot of bios on her plate.
She has a system also, and almost like a template of how she responds that I think is very practiced and very effective too. And I think the way most of us do bio responses is perhaps allow the bio to seep into us a bit, try to really understand what that person was thinking, feeling, experiencing, both when they were writing it and the events they were writing about, and then try to craft a response. And that can be very taxing just in terms of emotional energy and all that, but it's a very important thing we're putting together. But back to your question, how did we make that happen? I would just say, commitment and a never say die attitude. And you just keep plugging away at it until it's done. And the biggest hero of that story is Jason White, who did all of the organizing and coordinating with each of the bio writers, all the, Google Sheets, magic. So that was a huge help. And if that had also been on my plate, that would have been a monster.
Were there any moments in that whole process where you were like, well, shit, this isn't going to happen. This is not going to work?
Oh, yeah. Yep. There are a few of those. I think one was when we realized that we needed to find a way to print 70 bio responses. And we had 16 hours to do it, and which would have been fine if it was the only thing on my plate that day,
Yeah.
But I think you actually came and helped out with part of that, Clay.
I went to FedEx to get something. I don't know what it was, but I was a runner for somebody. But that I had the morning off. You were a runner
at FedEx, and then you came and helped out with the tail end of the collating and organizing of the print job at Staples.
Yes.
Which I spent, I don't know how many hours, more than 2.5, printing out all the bio responses and stuff and getting them organized and dealing with the not always functioning correctly machines that we had to work with. But it's basically, in another life, I was an administrative assistant. So you just kind of pull on those experiences of how you get things done.
You have skills. You're skilled. Like, it needs to happen. You just find the way to make it happen, and then it happens.
Yeah, that's it. That's what I should have said. That would have summed up the whole conversation right there.
I wish I had that. So I have the ability a lot of times. I just don't. My give a shit is broken sometimes, where it's just like I really struggle to identify the things that. Well, I don't struggle to identify what needs to be done. I struggle to find the desire to do them. So when I'm around people who have what I lack, it's quite inspiring, and I like it, and I try to be influenced by it, and I try to try that on for size sometimes, and it's fun to be around, and I like it, and I think it makes me a better person getting to be around people like you and the other folks who were there with us that week.
That was definitely a place where my childhood conditioning came in handy, Midwest work ethic and kind of the whole Protestant waspy, do it before you do anything fun kind of mentality. It's been well ingrained.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think, I don't know where I learned this, but I learned to wait until it, have fun and be miserable about what you're procrastinating about while you're having fun. And then at least you can kind of have fun, and then you can just be miserable because it didn't get done on time. So maybe I need to not do that, less of that and more of how you're doing it.
I don't know. I think that would probably balance my life pretty well. Maybe we should just swap each other's worldviews for a while.
Hey, I'm down. Let's give that a whirl. And honestly, I mean, that's kind of the idea, right? And what I do and what I'm comfortable with is not all that I need. And so can I just take a little bit from you and take a little bit from Scott and take a little bit from, like, if I can learn about what works in other people's life and implement that into my own, then I think that probably leads to a better place. For me, at least. So I don't know. Maybe I'm oversimplifying what that is.
I don't think so. I think it's one of the messages of Enneagram work. Whatever it is you're so fixated on, it's covered. You don't have to make it such a big deal. Like, you already, as a 4, I already am unique and bringing meaning and depth. I don't have to bang that nail so hard. And there's other things that could bring balance to my life that are meaningful too.
We had a moment where everybody was going on a tour of the prison at RJ Donovan that week. I didn't want to go in, and I don't know that I was able to, or if it was just I didn't want to. I think I didn't want to. And I was in the parking lot, and then you, I think, were the 5th, and they could only have 4 or something like that. So at any rate, we were chilling in the parking lot waiting for the others to come back, and we had a little bit of time to just chit-chat and shoot the shit and all that stuff, and I enjoyed it. Those are like the highlights of my week, to just getting a chance to sit and talk. And we're separated by so many miles and mostly only connect over the internet. And I enjoy stuff like that. So I think you're fun to be around. And I appreciate your time today to sit and chat with me about that week. It was a very cool week, and I'm glad that I got to be there. And I hope it happens again. And I hope I get to be there for that one too. So with all that said, I do want to just turn it over to you, and anything that's on your mind. We have no time limit. I have all the space in the world to record. So whether it's about that week or about the work in general or whatever's on your heart, just the floor is yours.
Okay. Wow. Anything I want to say, a platform. Finally. No, just kidding. Well, first thing I want to say is I had forgotten about that moment, Clay, where that was after a very long day. I think it might've been Tuesday, which was probably the most challenging day of the week for me. And I remember when I realized, it's probably not going to really be practical for me to join this tour, which was fine because I'd already been to the facility before. I was like, I just get to go sit and do nothing for a little bit. I was really excited about that. And then I realized, it's me and Clay sitting and doing nothing. And honestly, there might not be a lot of people that know this about me, actually, but my favorite thing to do with people I love is sit and do nothing. Like, just share space. Mm-hmm. And doesn't have to be an activity, doesn't even have to be talking, just being together. And so I really enjoyed that moment too. We did talk a bit here and there, but I didn't feel the pressure to keep a conversation going or anything. It was just this happy, bright spot in the universe in the parking lot of one of RTD's buildings. I loved that. But generally about just RJD and EPP work, I guess the only thing I want to say is how much this idea of we do the work together is really real and is really a thing. And there's no such thing as arriving or making it or having been with EPP for a certain amount of time so that you're not in the work for yourself all the time, every day. And that really keeps me honest. And I think we all need that. I'll speak for myself. I think I need that. I need a place that is going to continually bring it back to what am I doing for my inner work? Because it's easy for me to lose myself in a to-do list or a way I can make a difference. And for me, that can also be falling asleep to my heart, to my ego patterns, and a bunch of things that are hard for me and the people that love me. So I think I want to end with that, and that this was fun. I appreciate the invitation. Thanks for having me on.
For more information about EPP, please visit EnneagramPrisonProject.org. We appreciate your time and attention today. Stay tuned for future episodes of the podcast, which you can expect on the first Tuesday of every month as we continue to tell the story of the Enneagram Prison Project.